record your consent to being recorded. All right, so we'll start with a very brief program overview, and then I'll go over the application process, steps to completing your application. I'll give a couple of examples of what successful applications look like, and then we'll go over next steps and questions. So the general vision of the program is to increase regional capacity to repurpose irrigated agricultural land to reduce groundwater use. The goals of the program, and I know this is a pretty heavy slide, you can always come back to it and they're in the guidelines. The goals of the program are to support coordinated regional efforts to achieve groundwater sustainability while protecting the economic viability of agriculture and making sure that farmers and ranchers are engaged and taking leadership roles in this work. As well as various other goals that are outlined in statute. So again, we're looking to support coordinated regional efforts to achieve groundwater sustainability. We're looking to support repurposing lands that are least viable for agriculture, and promote multi-benefit opportunities to convert lands to less water-intensive uses while maintaining natural and working lands. The program can also be used to promote short and medium-term drought relief, of course, reducing groundwater use, and restoring wildlife habitat and wildlife connectivity. Okay, so who is eligible to apply for the program? So we have two eligibility requirements. We have a geographic eligibility and we have an applicant eligibility. So in terms of eligible areas, the eligible areas for this program are critically overdrafted basins with an approved groundwater sustainability plan or an alternative to a GSP. Again, those have to be approved. If you do not have an approved GSP, you may still be eligible under the second eligibility option for our program, which is high and medium priority groundwater basins that are subject to an emergency drought declaration. So the vast majority of critically overdrafted basins are also designated high priority basins, and every county within the state is still currently subject to an emergency drought declaration. If you have questions about the eligibility of your geographic area, please feel free to reach out, and we can answer that for you. One final note on that is that for the emergency drought declaration, that eligibility is based on the application due date. So if the emergency drought declaration is rescinded after the application due date, then you would still be eligible to apply as long as it was in place as of the application due date. So who are eligible applicants? Eligible applicants are groundwater sustainability agencies, federally and non-federally recognized California Native American tribes, public agencies, nonprofit groups with 501c status, and water masters that are implementing an approved groundwater sustainability plan or alternative to a GSP. If eligible applicants that are not a groundwater sustainability agency or a tribe must partner with at least one groundwater sustainability agency to submit their application. The reason for this is that you do need to account for the groundwater benefits related to your projects, and so we want to make sure that you are connected with the groundwater sustainability agencies who are doing that accounting. To verify that, you will need to, if you are not a GSA or a tribe, you will need to include a resolution or a letter from the groundwater sustainability agency that you're partnering with, stating their support for the project and how they will be involved in the project work. Okay. We do also require applicants to have the capacity to administer the grant. As you'll see later in the presentation, partnering and collaboration are important components of this work, and these are very large, complicated grants. And so we do need to know that the entity that is applying for the funding and that will be the grantee for the funding does have the structures in place to manage those funds. What does that look like? We will need to see how your board or management structure will contribute to the execution of project activities, what professional staff you have in place that are qualified to develop and implement the activities and coordinate the grant work, and what financial resources you have at your disposal to support the implementation of the grant, and any other additional resources that you might have. Okay, so what exactly are you applying for? This is also one of the eligibility criteria. We are providing regional block grants to organizations to essentially develop a land repurposing program in your region. So each application must include the 6 deliverables that are on your screen. So that includes a multi-benefit agricultural land repurposing plan that identifies and prioritizes regionally appropriate land repurposing strategies and projects to help reduce groundwater use and promote groundwater sustainability. Each application must include land repurposing project development and permitting. So you have to set aside some funds to actually develop land repurposing projects. You have to set aside a majority of your funds to actually implement land repurposing projects. And then you need to set aside some funds for the work that supports all of this, right? So partner and collaborator capacity needs, so reimbursing those who are providing you with their expertise to develop and implement projects and plans. You need to set aside some funding for outreach, education, and training around land repurposing and the work to do land repurposing. And you need to set aside some funds to actually monitor the projects that you put in place. Work towards these deliverables can be conducted simultaneously or sequentially as determined by each grantee to ensure the successful implementation of your grant. So if you don't already have a plan in place, but you do have some low-hanging fruit for land repurposing projects that you want to move forward while you're still getting your plan in place, that you can proceed with implementing those projects while also working on your plan with concurrence from the department. So as you're thinking about pulling together an application and a proposal, you want to think about how will you actually conduct this work and what will be the most meaningful timeline to do that. I will also say that if you already have elements of plans or a plan in place to do land repurposing work and to guide that work in your region, that is okay. You may use portions of existing plans in lieu of developing an entirely new land repurposing plan. Any existing plans that you already have in place that will supplement this work, you would just need to present to the department for us to consider and ensure that it meets all of the goals of the program and the requirements for the program. All right, so that's the eligibility criteria. So jumping into the selection criteria, you've already seen this slide, you can look at it again. So our first criteria is the alignment with program goals. So obviously we do have quite a few program goals here. We don't expect that every proposal will meet every single one of these goals. However, we do expect that proposals address multiple of these items in depth. And proposals that do that address multiple items in depth will be rewarded. We will be awarded more points than proposals that address fewer items in depth. And also proposals that address one item in depth would be awarded more points than proposals that superficially attempt to address, multiple items or lack support for that. So as you're developing your proposals, as you're pulling together those ideas for what what you envision land repurposing in your region to be, think about how the work that you're looking to conduct aligns with each of these goals. All right, the next eligibility criteria is partnership and collaboration. Partnership and collaboration is really at the heart of our program's design. The image that you see here shows how regional block grant recipients and the statewide support entity will be expected to partner and collaborate with various local and regional groups throughout the life of their program. We do expect that you will provide an application that demonstrates multiple partnerships and collaborations within your region. And you will be required to show evidence of partnerships and collaboration in your applications via letters of support or other signed agreements. We also will consider any proposed additional partnerships you have. So if you have, if you've lined up a few partnerships, but you're still working on getting others lined up for at the time of your application, you can speak to what those proposed partnerships look like, and we will consider those as well. All right, we also will be evaluating community engagement related to your proposal. So we do require significant community engagement and collaboration with the stakeholders in your regions or basins through the development of your plan as well as in the development of projects. So your proposals will be expected to demonstrate plans for extensive community engagement throughout the grant term. To ensure specifically that disadvantaged communities are engaged in and meaningfully benefit from your work, block grantees are required to identify and describe the disadvantaged communities within their planning area or near any projects proposed for development. They are expected to describe the extent to which each disadvantaged community near a proposed project would benefit from the project, or if there isn't a benefit, why there's no benefit to that community. Block grantees would also be expected to describe the process by which they will engage with those disadvantaged communities to actually develop and implement projects. And they are also expected to actually engage with those disadvantaged communities in the development of those projects. So I bring all of this up. This is a requirement for all block grantees, but as you are developing your proposals, you'll really want to think about how those requirements apply in your region and to your work, so that you can describe that in your application, so that you can give the application reviewers a clear view for how you're really conceiving and thinking about community engagement through your work. So applicants that demonstrate experience or expertise in engaging with farmers, ranchers, disadvantaged communities, and tribes will receive more points in the application review. And those that outline clear steps in their work plan for actually engaging in disadvantaged communities through their planning, through their project development and project implementation will receive more points. So in addition to the community engagement piece, we are also looking at what are the specific disadvantaged community benefits that your work will provide. So think about how your proposals will actually impact the communities in your area, and specifically the disadvantaged communities in your region. These benefits will largely be determined based on your actual engagement with relevant communities, and we encourage you to start that engagement early and see if you can partner with those communities or collaborate with those communities through the development of your proposal. That is not necessarily required, but it's something to think about if that makes sense for your application. But think about, as you're developing your application, how some of these benefits may materialize through your work. For example, substantiated benefits to disadvantaged communities could include increased access to nature for those communities, improved drinking water supplies, improved air quality, the creation of community agriculture buffer zones. Those are just some examples, to name a few. And then the last two criteria that we will be looking at in the review of your applications is both the applicant's fiscal and administrative capacity to administer the grant. So the extent to which you have fiscal and administrative control systems in place to oversee your block grant, as well as the policy and project expertise that you bring to this work. Before I move on, I just want to speak to kind of the overall expectations for what your applications look like. So as I said at the beginning, we are looking at helping you to create a land repurposing program for your region. So that is a large visioning exercise. You may be further along in that work. You may be new to that work. We have successful grantees on both ends of that spectrum. Really, what we are looking for in your application is how clear is your vision for land repurposing work in your region? How clear are the partnerships and collaborations that you're building around this work to move it forward in your region? And what is your strategy for moving that work forward? So very quickly, the review process, DOC staff will verify eligibility and completeness. We will then have a review panel that is composed of different agency representatives, including representatives from Department of Water Resources, Department of Fish and Wildlife, State Water Resources Control Board, Office of Planning and Research, California Department of Food and Ag, Department of Conservation, and a few others. So they will be the ones on the panel. We will conduct applicant interviews, and our review panel will score and rank projects to develop their funding recommendations. We will bring those funding recommendations to the director of the Department of Conservation, who will make the final funding decisions. That funding decision will be based on the recommendations of the review panel, but will also take into consideration other priorities of the department. All right, and I already went over the ranking, so I won't touch on that anymore. So I'm going to jump into some example project types that you can think about pursuing through your proposal as part of this work, and some of the program priorities that we expect you to include. And then I'll give you a couple of examples of successful applications from the first round so that you can see what a successful application looks like. So on your screen is a list of example project types that are fundable through the program to both be developed and be implemented. I mentioned that a majority of the funding does need to go to project implementation, and these are the types of projects that you can consider. If you have a project type that is outside of this list, we can consider that as well. You would just need to talk with the department about whether or not it makes sense for the funding source. A couple of points. So I'll highlight, we've got the creation or restoration of habitat on the list, creation of multi-benefit recharge areas, transitioning irrigated land to dryland farming or rangeland, planting cover crops or conservation cover, creating parks or community recreation areas. These funds can also be used for incentive payments to landowners, farmers and ranchers to implement multi-benefit projects, where those payments are provided. The benefit of the project would need to last at least 10 years. And we would also want to see an actual repurposing of the land. So you can't just use incentive payments for fallowing of land. There would actually need to be a new use on the property. You can also use the funding for land acquisitions, voluntary land transfers, and easement acquisitions. Please ignore that bottom bullet. That is a holdover and is not actually allowed. So land acquisitions, voluntary land transfers, and easement acquisitions are allowed as long as they are done in conjunction with one of the other project types. We do not actually fund pumping allocation acquisitions. So please ignore that last one. Okay, and just a reminder, this again is in the guidelines. Your land repurposing projects that you are aiming to develop need to address at least one program goal in addition to groundwater sustainability. That's the multi-benefit part of the program. We have multiple desired outcomes that are listed in the guidelines, so you'll need to meet those. Projects must provide benefits that last at least 10 years. We do have an exception to this for projects that are directly in response to the drought, in which case those benefits need to be reasonably durable. Projects should be consistent with groundwater sustainability plans for the area. If the groundwater sustainability plan doesn't speak to land repurposing, then projects just need to not conflict with the groundwater sustainability plan. And we do require that any groundwater recharge that is achieved with funding from the program, that recharge be subtracted from the groundwater that's available for extraction for the duration of the benefits provided by the program. That is a requirement from statute. That is not something that we can change. And then, as you're thinking about the projects that you might bring forward, your projects should be prioritized based on meaningful benefits to disadvantaged communities, whether they're conducted on lands least viable for irrigated agriculture, and projects that contribute to resource connectivity. So what does this look like in practice? All right. So I'll be speaking to the first two projects on this list, the Pixley and the Kauai grants, which were awarded last year. For those of you not familiar with the geography, though I am pointing to those with my arrow. Hopefully you can. Okay, so the Pixley grant, they have a land repurposing team that is comprised of multiple GSAs. It's also comprised of a land trust, the Tule Basin Land and Water Conservation Trust, which will be focused on acquiring and holding land that is repurposed. Self-Help Enterprises is also one of their project partners, which focuses on community-based engagement and organization. They've got the Nature Conservancy, Audubon, as well as UC Merced, who's doing some work. So these organizations have come together to form the Tulare Basin Watershed Partnership Network. This is something that they've been working on for a few years. That doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have a formalized network of partners from multiple interests in order to be successful in this program. But this is just one example of a group of partners that have been pulled together. So what does their approach look like? They are taking a dual scale approach to planning and implementation. So they have 3 key priority subregions within their basin that they're focusing on. And I can go back to this map. Those basins are in the gray dash. And those are centered around disadvantaged communities in their areas and those regions that are most likely to be impacted from SGMA just based on water rights. So they are focusing on the developing plans for each of those 3 key priority regions, but then they are also going to develop a basin-wide plan that can be applied to the areas that aren't being focused on in the future. So they have already identified a few projects for project design and permitting. They're looking at a couple of recharge projects that they've identified and a water security project that they've identified that they'll be developing through this grant. And as well as a habitat restoration project that they're working on, and the design of a multi-benefit groundwater dependent ecosystem pilot that they're proposing to work on. They have also identified a few projects that are ready for implementation funding as soon as they get the green light from the department. So they're looking to expand a recharge project that they have in process. They have an upland restoration project that they're on approximately 450 acres of land that is ready to be implemented. And they have a pilot conservation cover program in the area that they're looking to expand and build on as well. And then they've set aside additional funding for other projects that will come up through their planning effort so that they can fund additional projects. They also have identified that they're going to direct some of their funding to fund key positions with their partner entities to ensure that they have capacity throughout their network to actually get this job done. And they are going to provide funding for expertise for disadvantaged community residents who will serve in an advisory capacity for their work. They've also set aside funding to do project monitoring. So for example, evaluating their prospective recharge sites so that they can provide additional recommendations for future project, collecting groundwater samples, and evaluating the impacts of their crop retirement. So that is one successful application. And I actually need to jump around. So that was one successful application. That was one applicant that had already done a lot of groundwork around land repurposing in their region. The next applicant comes from the other side of the spectrum. So they haven't done a lot of groundwork around land repurposing, but they'll be using the funding from the program to really do that work, to lay that foundation. This successful application came to us from the Kauai Sub-Basin. It's the partners are the East Kauai GSA, Greater Kauai GSA, Mid Kauai GSA. They're also partnering with the Sequoia Riverlands Trust, and they have multiple collaborators that are working with them from different industries, including agriculture, irrigation districts. Again, Sequoia Riverlands Trust representing agricultural land conservation and habitat conservation. The partnership lists that you see on here, both for Kauai and for Pixley, those are the ones that are the key team, but both teams, Kauai and Pixley, also have an extensive list of collaborating organizations from multiple different interests across sectors that are also supportive of their work. All right, so what is Kauai's approach? They are focusing their work through their integrated water management group, which has an established management structure in place. They have an established set of diverse participants that they can take advantage of and rely on to get their work done. They have a project input process. They have a scoring rubric, so they can really rely on the structure from that program to move this work along. They have identified gaps in what that structure looks like. They need to add representatives from tribes, from disadvantaged communities, from environmental interests into that work. And so they've identified that, and they've got a plan to move forward to fill those gaps. They are working in parallel on developing their plan, doing outreach and education around land repurposing, and simultaneously identifying land repurposing projects for development. So that's an example of a grant that is very early on in their planning work, was able to pull together a strong partnership and collaboration network, had a very clear vision for the process that they were going to go through to do their land repurposing plan, and was open to multiple different strategies for land repurposing, which made their grant successful. Okay, so just to wrap up, for round 2, we are expecting to grant 4 regional block grants of $8.89 million each. The grant term will run for approximately 3.5 years. These funds need to be expended by June of 2027, and so the grants will end in March of 2027. The region size is flexible. That is up to you based on your own knowledge and goals of what you want this program to be, keeping in mind that we are thinking on the regional level. Timing. So if you have not begun already, I would encourage you to begin working on your proposal development now. Applications are due March 29th of 2023, and we will thereafter review the applications, hold interviews with each applicant team, and then in early to mid-June, we will notify applicants of their award determinations, with the goal of entering into grant agreement by July or August of 2023. And that is it. So with that, I will open it up to questions. Melinda, do you have the chat open?
I do indeed. So Toby had a question in regard to Kauai, asking if more than 50% must be used for implementation. The Kauai provide detailed budget for the plan process, outreach, education, partner capacity, etc., and set aside dollars for developing, permitting, plus permitting and monitoring.
Yes,
so basically, did they outline their plan? Yeah.
Yes, and I did not include a slide here on budgets. We do not expect you to provide a line item budget in your application. Providing your budget at the level of the deliverables is perfectly acceptable. We We did have applicants that got a little bit more specific in their work plan narrative about how much funding was going to each section, and that certainly is helpful. If you don't yet know what that looks like, though, that's fine. We would still encourage you to submit an application. We do encourage the allocation of funds for disadvantaged community expertise. So think about where that might fit into your budget as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Hannah. Another up to the chest. Can you expand on the statute and the requirement that water recharge can't be extracted during the 10-year period?
So the duration for which that statutory language applies is not specific to the 10-year period. It's specific to the duration of the benefits provided. So if you're claiming that the benefits provided are in perpetuity, then the groundwater recharge you would need to take that into consideration. Hold on just one second as I flip through my slides. So yeah, so the language is any groundwater recharge must be subtracted from the amount available for extraction for the duration of the benefit paid for by the program. That is specific to the funding that we have provided. So sorry, I'm trying to gather my thoughts on this. This is an area where we're still working through what exactly does this mean, and will grantees be able to use our funding to actually develop a recharge area if the intent is to pay for water to be recharged in this basin. So we're fairly comfortable in stating that if you're developing a multi-benefit recharge area that will be primarily for that will be primarily used for stormwater or flood benefit to capture floodwaters, that would be consistent with our program. The likelihood that because you would be able to maintain those floodwaters within the groundwater basin. Where things get tricky is that if you're using allocated water rights to recharge, then you get into a situation where you need to speak with the State Water Resources Control Board about whether or not you're in violation of their beneficial use requirements. I don't want to speak more to that. This just quite frankly is not my area of expertise, but hopefully that's enough for you to go on for now.
Perfect. Thanks, Hannah. Spencer is asking for the incentive payments to landowners, farmers, and ranchers to implement multi-benefit land repurposing projects that create a public benefit for at least 10 years. Did I hear correctly that the incentives must be for permanent repurposing, not fallow?
The incentives need to be for repurposing. That repurposing doesn't have to be permanent, but you are correct that you can't just provide incentive payments for fallowing. So you can't just ask them not to irrigate their fields and give them a payment for that. If you are providing an incentive payment to a landowner, it needs to be to implement some sort of repurposing strategy. That repurposing strategy could be planting cover crops for X number of years. It could also be for permanent land repurposing. That's up to what your strategy is for repurposing efforts.
Thanks. Shelley is asking, are applicants who were awarded during round 1 eligible to apply for round 2?
No.
And then Sarah's asking, says, the grant period is through March 2027, but benefits must last 10 years. What if benefits require some form of ongoing support to be maintained, such as land is repurposed for 10 years with yearly payment to landowner based on that year's water savings? So in other words, if the payments are going beyond the grant term to support the benefits through those 10 years.
That you would have to develop a mechanism to sustain those payments beyond the life of the grant. We can talk a little bit more about that offline. Yeah, we can talk a little bit more about that offline, but the goal of this program is to help you establish a program that goes beyond the life of the grant. And so we would anticipate that you're developing mechanisms and structures to maintain that work.
Shelley Rose is asking, will the line item budget summary provided for the regional block grant application checklist be sufficient to submit with a proposal? I'm assuming yes. So that's the budget summary that's within the application package.
Then yes.
Is that what you're referring to, Shelley? Just to confirm, feel free to come up with me.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, it's within the application packet. That should be sufficient. And again, feel free to reach out if you have additional questions to me. Toby is asking roughly how long did the plan development process, including public outreach and development for Kauai and Pixley take? Also, is it your hope that the plan developed with these funds would further identify and develop projects that could be funded and implemented through this program, or perhaps funded and implemented using other state or federal funds? So the first quick question there is roughly how long did it take for plan development for Kauai and Pixley?
Yeah, so to answer that question, they are still developing their plan. So they are both taking the simultaneous project development, implementation, and plan development approach. So I cannot answer fully because they are still in development. So all of our first round grantees entered grant in September of last year. So they're still ramping up and getting that work going. And to your second plan, yes, the hope is that you would use these funds to further identify and develop projects that would be funded and implemented either through this program or through other programs. Our goal with this is to help set up regional structure, to help you establish regional structures that you can then use to take advantage of other state and federal funding sources.
Super, thanks. And then Shelley Rose is asking, can we request a copy of the grant agreement that will be executed with DOC if awarded? And I thought we had that on the website, but maybe we don't.
Yeah, we can send that to you, Melinda, if you want to send out the template with the recording.
Okay, sounds great. We'll do. And someone else is asking, G person, I'm not sure who that is. A round 1 applicant can't reapply in round 2. Yes, that's correct. Shelley is asking, does eligible costs include partners, collaborators, creating and distributing?
Hold on. Back up.
Yep. A
round 1 applicant absolutely can apply in round 2 if they were not awarded funding.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
A round 1 applicant that was awarded funding cannot reapply.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry.
No worries.
Went too quickly past
and sorry if I misspoke earlier.
Who were awarded? No, Shelley asked earlier if it was awarded. So yeah, good clarification there. Perfect. Does eligible costs include partners, collaborators, creating and distributing outreach materials?
Yes.
Definitely. Very good. So that's the end of the chat so far, but feel free to pop more in, or if you have a you have a question and you want to raise your hand and come off mute. And we still have about 10 minutes and I'm happy to answer questions.
I do want to make everybody aware of one additional resource. So certainly you can be in touch with myself and our staff at mlrp@conservation.ca.gov. We also have our statewide support entity, which is comprised of self-help enterprises, EDF, and environmental incentives, and they are available to help walk you through application development and provide you with technical assistance as needed as well. So you've got a couple of avenues that you can go to develop, to work on developing your projects. They also have, they posted a blog last year after our awards that highlighted some of the key themes with the successful applications from last year. So you can take a look at that as well.
And I can add that to the email too. I think that'd be valuable. Great. We have two more questions just popped in. Farina asked, for land acquisition, does the ag land need to be active or zoned for agriculture?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. So ideally we would see projects that are currently in agriculture that you would be converting out of agriculture. However, we do know that there are some landowners that are already being proactive about this and or that just had to fallow because of the drought, and we don't necessarily want to preclude those landowners from being able to participate in this program. So we are a little bit flexible on whether or not the land is currently in agriculture or if it's been in agriculture in recent years around whether or not it's eligible.
Perfect. And Anna with EDF just popped in her contact information, as well as Sonia Sanchez with Self-Help Enterprise. So feel free to reach out to those folks. Thanks for posting those in that. Sarah is asking, what is the distinction between a partner that is not providing money and a collaborator, particularly during planning phases, when working with and participation are essentially the same in the program deliverables or plans?
Yeah, so a partner is anyone that's providing money, and a collaborator is anybody who's not. Is how we distinguish it for our program. You might refer to them differently kind of among yourselves and in your work, and that's totally fine. But just in terms of the definition for our program, the distinction between a partner and a collaborator is that a partner is providing a financial contribution and a collaborator is not providing a financial contribution to the work. Otherwise, they are the same.
Thank you,
Anna.
Yeah, Anna just popped the link in for the EDF post that Shauna referenced. So thank you for that. So he says he's not seeing the chats. If you go up, you should be able to go up at the top of your screen. And there should be a little bubble that says chat, and you need to just click on that and open up on the right-hand side of your window, the Teams window. Not sure if you're using, sometimes I think if you're on the phone, it's a little more awkward, or sometimes on an iPad, but you just click on that little bubble.
We can always, as part of the follow-up email that Melinda will send, we can include the self-help emails and the link to the blog post. Melinda, if you don't mind doing that.
Yeah, no, of course, no problem at all. And we will be sending copies of the presentation and the recording as mentioned. And also, since the recording, you'll be able to hear what the questions were.
Awesome. Well, we are happy to stay on if anybody else has any additional questions. Otherwise, thank you for joining us today, and everybody have a lovely day.
Thanks all. And if you do have questions, feel free to take yourself off of mute.
I did. Hi, thank you. This is Sarah again. I did
Hey,
want to. I did just want to clarify because I know, in parts of the proposal, it talks about like in-kind contributions from partners that aren't necessarily cash, but the employees of the entity are working on the project and giving their time, which I think is also considered a partnership. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, that could be considered that could be considered part of the partnership as well. This year, the application is a little bit different in that the partner and collaborator components of the application are one selection criteria. So the distinction between the two is a little less important. Really, what we're looking for is what organizations are you engaging with in this work? And what types of support are they providing? If you say it's a partner and it happens to, from our definition, we determine it's a collaborator, you're not going to get dinged points for that necessarily, because again, they are in the same bucket.
Okay. And should the statewide support entity be a partner if we're going to work with them?
No, not necessarily. So everybody will be working with the statewide support entity. If we do have a couple of grantees that are working with one or another of the organizations that make up our statewide support entity, separate from their work on separate from their statewide support entity responsibilities, and they had already engaged with them in their work at the regional block grant level. So it might be appropriate for you to engage with them in your work at the regional level, separate from their work as a statewide support entity. And in that case, then absolutely, feel free to reach out to them and engage with them in that work. But you won't get more points if you're engaging with them simply because they're the statewide support entity, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
And Tove or Sarah Madsen, did you have some additional questions?
Nope, just listening along.
Okay, sounds good.